I have nothing against technology whatsoever, in the way that I have nothing against hamburgers whatsoever. But I do have something against the overuse of hamburgers, and in the same way I have objections to the overuse or the misuse of technology. And I think at the moment, when you look at the number of hours that children are spending using recreational technology, and even infants being exposed to technology, there is a problem, and that is my sole objection, not to the technology itself. Technology has come upon us without us thinking very much about it. At worst, most of us think, well, technology might be a bit of a waste of time for our children. But we're now finding in the scientific world that there are actual problems, not just with what, i.e. the content of what young people are being exposed to, but the sheer number of hours per day that they're spending in front of a screen, as opposed to in real life, seeing real people and doing real things, and the age at which they're starting to be exposed to screens. And that age is now just after birth in their bedrooms, with screens being put in infants' bedrooms. And this is the world that I'm concerned about, not the technology per se. We have to understand that in a strange way, we have seen our children having access, in many ways unlimited access, to food, and then junk food. We now have the fattest children in our history. Our children have levels of diabetes we've never seen before. In Britain, our children will die before their parents in terms of their lifespan. And in the same way, technology, we haven't quite seen the same effects yet. That children having access to technology will automatically overuse it. And in the way that we have to control how much our children are eating and what they're eating, or they'll become obese and unhealthy, we also have to understand that technology is a health issue. Like passive smoking and like food, we have to control the amount, the content, and also the age at which the children are exposed to. So I would say we have to now view technology not as a lifestyle, not even as just a form of education, but as a medical health issue, which must take precedence over those other claims. I would say the technology I would be most concerned about is anything which has a lot of fast editing, which is designed for younger children. This is likely to cause chemical changes in their brain which will permanently damage their attention. So the idea of fastly edited, quickly edited DVDs, educational DVDs, for example, the so-called, brainy baby, baby Einstein, those sort of things being shown to babies are linked with children who have smaller vocabularies, who don't learn to speak as well. That would be my biggest objection. Things designed for children under 3. And I think an awful lot of the content of a lot of the recreational media children are watching on YouTube and other websites is socially and emotionally damaging. Images of endless young, slender women are damaging our girls and are strongly linked to eating disorders. I suppose the technology, and you'll be very happy to hear this at the conference, that I'd be most happy for our children to have some exposure to when the time is right, would be educational technology. What I regret is that if you look at the statistics, on the whole, children do not spend their time looking at educational things. We all know that, but very few people really want to admit it. The most popular things for young people are going to be pornography, gambling, games, and all kinds of recreational things, and very little time is actually spent doing studying or educational pursuits. I think a number of things have to be done. Certain countries like France have now actually outlawed television broadcasts of any sort to children under the age of 3. It looks like Australia is going to follow. In the United States, the American Academy of Pediatrics has for 10 years told all American doctors and parents, don't let any children under 2 see any screens because it may negatively affect brain development. So I think we need to have statements from our figures of authority in health and in government advising parents, in the same way that they advise parents on food and children and many other things, just advising them and then allowing parents to make their decisions. I think schools should be educated to understand that technology can also cause problems. It isn't the answer to education necessarily. And I also think that parents must understand they have a responsibility to control when their children start seeing technology, whether their children have screens in their bedrooms, and most importantly, how many hours and minutes a day they spend in a virtual world as opposed to how many hours and minutes a day they spend in the real world looking at people who are real, people who love them, and people they care about. And at the moment, tonight, for example, in Britain, at least 75% of all dinners will be eaten in front of a television set. Many of those dinners will be eaten alone in a bedroom in front of a television set or in front of a screen doing social networking. That isn't good for human beings, no matter what their age. It isn't a question of turning back the clock to a better time. We always have new developments, whether they're cars or refrigerators or anything else. We know that when the car is invented, some people overuse the car. They drive everywhere, and the problem, of course, becomes they become weak and they become fat. Technology is the latest development which can cause problems. I would simply say we have to step back and realize that technology is only a tool. It mustn't become a life. And I have to remind everybody of what virtual means. Virtual means almost, but not quite. It will never take the place of real face-to-face interaction, whether that's social or educational, and it has to be rebalanced. And the balance at the moment isn't right. It could be right, it could be a great tool, but the way that most people, most young people are using it now is not for education. We all know that. In the way that most young people and children are using food is not for nutrition, it's for recreation and entertainment, and they're becoming fat and unhealthy. The same thing is true with electronic screen media. They don't use it for education. Very little time is spent doing that. Most of it's spent displacing real activities which would be good for them. I'm very surprised that people are surprised by some of the information I'm giving them. And they seem most surprised that most of these things aren't my opinions. They are published in very established medical journals, which they've never heard about before. And I think what problem we have here is that if I was at a nutrition conference and the discussion was about the introduction of nutrition for healthier children, and all of the people on the platforms and the chairman and the sponsors were all from McDonald's and Burger King and chocolate companies, everybody would say, well, hold on, this is all being run by people who sell the products, which may or may not make our children fat. Yet, because this is a technology conference, nobody questions the fact that this is a conference run and attended by people in the e-learning world, and that they find it hard to understand that there's also a different way to look at children and their well-being, and that information comes from a more objective source, in my opinion, people whose interest isn't in e-learning or technology, but is only interested in what affects children's brains, minds, and educational outcomes. And that comes from a different field, and people seem very surprised that this different field exists, and that maybe this different field is more important in giving us the answers than the industry who develops the technology for the children. I'm at this conference because I was asked to come here and to provide the delegates and the other speakers with information that they don't seem to be aware of. Perhaps the conference has asked me because they need to have a token moral voice here. I am the conscience of the great delegates here who could be described perhaps in an unkindly way as the, the drug dealers of the educational world, the electronic child molesters, and I'm here to, in a tokenistic way, wag my finger and say, there are consequences to what you're doing to our children. Technology should be a tool, not a substitute for real-world experience or real learning. But that's a hard thing for me to ask when you're in an industry which has to make a profit. And also, I think that there's a big difference between technology in the West, rich countries, where they have a choice in how children learn and spend their time, as opposed to countries where the choice, or there isn't a choice, either they have access to learning or they have no access to learning, and either it has to be e-learning or nothing. And in those situations, the choices are very different, and the way they develop technology and the use of it is a very different thing. So my comments and my concerns are related particularly to Western industrialized societies, or generally richer industrialized societies around the world who have choices to make in terms of how many minutes or hours a day children can spend at screens or not. In countries which are poor, where there isn't access to information or teaching, it's a very different set of choices, and I don't have many comments at this conference to make about that.